right, good morning, kind of noon on the edge of morning. I am looking for my chat. If you are here and you can hear me, will you just make sure that I'm not talking to myself before I dive into teaching? Can you guys hear me okay? All right, thank you, Yvette and Christy, double Christy. Awesome. Charles and Robin, hello. Welcome, you guys. Great. I am technologically savvy today. And I think I did hear that this is recording, so we've got that going. I'm going to give it a minute or two before we start because it's not quite noon yet. Hello, Becky and Catherine. And I think everybody's muted, so we shouldn't have to fight that. Nikki, I see you're here. All right, cool. We'll give it a minute. Drink your coffee, use the bathroom. If you guys have questions, I'll teach first and then I'll do Q&A at the end. If you have questions that you want to make sure that I cover, put them in the chat. And when I get to the end and I'm doing Q&A, I'll scroll all the way back to the top and make sure if I haven't already covered it, I cover it. If it's already been covered, obviously, then we won't have to cover it again. But this is my first time teaching on Zoom, and I think that the chat in this scenario is what most people prefer for classes. Sorry, sorting my notes here. All right, 12:01. We're going to call it good and start. I hope you don't mind. I'm still very new to teaching in this kind of format, so I have notes here that I'm going to rely on heavily just to make sure that I'm being thorough and including as much information as possible. I'm hoping that it doesn't come across as like a fire hose of information, but there will be a recording. So if you need to kind of like go through it and listen or watch this again after the fact to absorb or reabsorb some of the information, you'll have that option as well. But I have notes here to hopefully be kind of in order and keep things covered. But I do just want to do a quick introduction of myself. For those that don't know, my name's Beth DeClerc, and my husband Tommy and I were both raised in the city, and we started homesteading over 10 years ago now. And we have 7 kids, and we are on 5 acres in Michigan. And we, at this point, we raise about 90% of our meat. We have a couple milk cows. We have eggs. We do a lot of produce, both veggies and fruit. And I am very passionate about what I call financially independent homesteading, which to me, it means that we're running our own homestead in a way that supports itself monetarily. And the reason why that's important, I know a lot of you are already signed up for my program that talks about this, but the reason why that's important is that in order to have a homestead that supports itself financially, you have to have core enterprises, which are your big income streams. And meat chickens has been one of our biggest income streams for several years now. And just to kind of show you the progression of that, we raised them for the first time in 2016, and we raised 16 that year. we actually only bought 10 baby chicks from the feed store, but a friend had spontaneously bought 6 of them and then changed their mind really quickly and gave them to us. So we ended up with 16 whole meat chickens our first year. And if you have raised them before, which I know a lot of you had, we learned a lot because meat chickens are not like layer chickens. They eat different, they poop different, they grow different, they're housed different. So it was definitely a learning curve for us, having only had layer chickens before. But we loved it, and we were definitely like hooked at that point, both the quality of the meat, but also just we loved having them. We loved what they did for our property. So the next year we raised 100. We went from 16 to 100. And our goal with the 100 was that we would keep 50 for ourselves and we would sell 50 to make ours, the cost of ours completely covered. And it wasn't quite enough to cover our cost, but um, but it was the beginning of this whole raising them for profit. And from there, we did 150 to 200 for several years. Then we jumped to raising 300 birds. Last year, we raised 400 meat chickens, and we kept 100 for our family, and then we sold 300. And that is what we plan to do this year as well, just because that's about the capacity for what our property can handle. So but I love meat chickens because they don't take up a lot of space. We only use about 2 acres for those 400 chickens. And that 2 acre pasture is actually also shared with other livestock. We also rotationally graze our cows in the same area. So if you are looking for something that is, an income stream that doesn't require a lot of space, they are a great option. They're also awesome because it's a short season. You're not committed to doing it for 5 or 6 or 12 months a year. You can be in and out in 8 weeks or 12 weeks if you want to. At the most, we really max out our growing season, but it's 5 or 6 months a year. And then we have a nice break and we don't have to do it for the rest of the year. So it's a really quick growing season. It's also a low startup cost, especially compared to other livestock, but even vegetable operations can be very expensive upfront costs if you're going to get infrastructure that allows you to kind of have a more controlled environment. So it doesn't get much cheaper than a baby chick. Two other positives of raising meat chickens: a quick turnaround, like I mentioned, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and you're in and out. And the last one is that from a business and a sales perspective, everybody loves chicken. I mean, most people eat chicken. In fact, even though our original goal was just to cover our cost, as we continue to grow them and we continue to just have more and more demand, we, tried to meet that demand by growing more ourselves. And it ended up being such a blessing to not only have the 100 birds that we keep a year not cost us anything, which saves us thousands of dollars, but we have also profited enough to be able to make thousands of dollars worth of upgrades to our homestead in tools and infrastructure. And that's not for that much more work because we had systems in place already. So a few quick disclaimers. If you are going to offer chickens for sale, I really do believe that you should have some experience and success raising them first. You probably would not open a bakery if you'd never made a loaf of bread before. Okay. You wouldn't offer to be a photographer for a wedding if you had never used a camera. And like I mentioned, meat chickens, they're very different than layer chickens. And if you are taking this class and you haven't raised meat chickens before, that's okay. You can offer them your first year for sale, but just be transparent with your customers. I will give a lot of marketing and sales tips that we have used to sell our chickens, but I'm never going to recommend you be dishonest or misleading with, what you are presenting to people. In fact, that second year where we raised 100, sold 50 of them, we had experience, but not much. And so I just told people, hey, we did this last year. We want to do it more. I will give you a lower price if you, support our venture by offsetting some of our cost as we do this. And as long as you're open with people, that is good enough. But just don't try to be something that you are not guaranteed to be. Last thing is if you have not raised them before too, I just want to say you can still benefit from this class. I'm not going to talk at all about how to specifically raise or process birds because I have a whole nother class that talks about that. But it never hurts to get this information early, especially if you are planning eventually to have this be something that you do as a business. you'll just be able to hit the ground running that much sooner because you'll have this kind of knowledge already in place. So, all right, let's dive in. This class is going to be broken up kind of into 4 sections. So we'll talk about things to do when you're getting started. Then we are going to dive into all of the numbers based things. So profitability, calculating your costs, calculating your pricing. Then we will do all of the marketing and sales aspects. So how to find and how to manage customers. And then I just have some bonus ideas at the end. If you haven't yet, there is a handbook that you can print. You should have a link in both of the emails that I sent. You don't have to have this printed while I'm going through the class, but there will be things that I reference that are included in here that might be helpful to visualize as I'm talking about them. So just to have a heads up about that. And I'm going to get a drink. And we'll do the getting started section. So you decide, I want to raise meat chickens for profit. A few things that you need to ask yourself first. Number one is, what's your goal? Are you looking to just double what you've done in the past for your family? Are you looking to kind of have that break even amount of covering your cost of your family's birds? Or are you looking to really maximize and turn a profit that you can roll into other areas of your homestead like we have? Have a general idea of what your goals are. And obviously there will be a point later on where we figure out what numbers it's going to take to hit those goals. And then the next thing you need to consider is your capacity. So there's multiple, facets of what your capacity is. The first, the most obvious one is how much space do you have? Okay. If you are thinking, I want to raise, enough meat chickens to have $1,000 to spend on other farm stuff, but you only have maybe a half an acre that you can commit to them. That's not an option, but it's going to take a very heavy amount of management to do that. So think about what's your capacity space wise. How much space do you have to commit to what your goal is going to be? Other capacity factors are, what's your infrastructure, or what are your, current systems set up like? Are you going to have to build more chicken tractors, or if you don't raise them on pasture, are you going to need a bigger pen? How many more waterers do you need? How many more feeders do you need? All of those types of things. And then the last thing to consider, is your time. So figuring out your timeline. The first thing is, are you going to do one big batch? Are you going to do multiple batches? And what month are you going to start, and where will that land your processing time? Because you need to know that in order to tell your customers. And when we first started, we just did one really big batch. We just got it one and done. And, the benefit of that obviously was that our commitment or our hold to the homestead was a shorter amount of time. Eventually, we spread it out to being 2 larger batches, and we timed it in a way that when the first batch was coming out of the chicken tractor to be processed, the second batch, was 2 or 3 weeks in the brooder, and they were ready to move directly into the chicken tractor. So there was a little bit of an overlap that shortened our commitment to raising them, but it gave us a little bit more space and easier butchering time. Now we have settled on actually doing 5 smaller batches throughout the year. So we get our first batch, we actually got it last week, 2 weeks ago, and we will have chickens all the way through September now. And the reason we did that is mainly because at butchering time, it makes it much more manageable for us because we butcher ourselves. And we're very comfortable butchering 40 to 80 birds at a time, but doing 100 to 120 at a time is not our preference. But another unexpected benefit to doing the smaller batches that, again, they overlap the whole time, is that we have a lot of customers that want to buy 20 or 30 birds from us each year, but they don't have 5 chest freezers like I do. They don't have the space to put away 20 or 30 birds. They might have their fridge freezer and one other smaller one. So by spreading out our batches, they are able to pick up 5 birds, 6 birds each month, every month of the summertime. And they end up ultimately getting more birds because they have that option. So you need to just ultimately decide what's going to work best for you, what makes sense with your summer schedule, because I really believe that if a income stream is going to be, a blessing to your homestead, it's going to fit in seamlessly. It's not going to be something that makes you feel burnt out or resentful because you've overcommitted yourself to something and not able to still fulfill other aspects of your life that are important. But you do need to decide what your schedule is going to be, because you want to get those birds locked in as soon as possible, both so that way you can be guaranteed that you get those chicks, but also that so you can start marketing and you can give your customers, yes, it's for sure going to be this month that you can, count on pickup. So, Pamela asked, how small are each of your five batches? Good question. So we do 80 per batch. We have 400 birds total ordered this year. So there's 80 in each batch, and that is 2 chicken tractors for us. So we have 4 chicken tractors that are just in a constant shuffle of batches, because as soon as one batch comes out, the next batch goes in, and it's like that all summer long here. All right. So that's your timeline consideration. Then the next thing we're going to talk about just some legal considerations. So this is mainly just to cover my own behind. Okay. I will give the disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a accountant. I'm not guaranteeing that anything I say is valid or legal and accurate. That's my disclaimer. But just know every area is going to have different rules for how you are allowed to offer your chickens legally. Even within the United States, it varies heavily from state to state. So you do need to check with your local regulations. Do not take what somebody says as gospel truth, even if they seem like they are really legitimate in knowing what the ruling is. I have had multiple times where long-term, lifetime 70-year-old farmers confidently and adamantly tell me that selling raw milk is illegal in Michigan, when it's not. It's actually 100% legal to sell raw milk in Michigan through a herd share program. And they were willing to die on that hill with their belief of that ruling. So do your research and figure out what the actual rulings are. And a few tips as you're kind of going through this process. Number one, if you just call the government office directly and say, hey, do I have to have a license or do I have to have a permit to sell chickens? I guarantee you they will say yes, because they make money off of selling licenses and permits. I have multiple friends who have paid for warehouse licenses and custom butchering licenses unnecessarily, not even actually needing them. And that's $100 a year or whatever that they are out. So you need to actually look at the documentation. If you are in Michigan, I will tell you that the ruling in Michigan is that you are legally allowed to sell up to 20,000 birds off of your property directly to your customer, and you can process them yourself. Now, if you are going to sell a chicken to a licensed facility, so a restaurant or a store, then you have to have them processed through a licensed butcher. So if you're going to sell to a licensed place, it has to be processed licensed. If you're going to sell direct to a consumer in Michigan, it does not have to be. Unless you are going to sell it by the cut, like you're going to sell just breast or just wings, then it's technically supposed to go through a licensed butcher. Now, if you live somewhere where it's not allowed, you're not allowed to sell chicken that's butchered on your farm to a customer directly, even if it's a whole bird. I have heard of people, this is not a recommendation, I have heard of people selling the meat chicken as a live animal and then processing it for free for people. So they're not selling meat, they're selling the live animal. Not recommending it, just what I've heard. Another common workaround for these, more really restrictive, unjust lawed areas is using what's called a PMA, which is a private members association. And basically, the way that that works is that people are going to buy into your farm through a membership. And as a member or an owner of your farm or homestead, they are allowed to have a portion of the production from your farm. And so that is another option that many people look into for really wanting to work directly with people and butcher themselves. So it's kind of like a CSA or a herd share. One last thing about regulations and licensing and things. If you live somewhere and you absolutely have to go through a licensed butcher, that doesn't mean, there's no chance of profitability. You'll just factor in that cost into your pricing. But if you are, just uncomfortable with the idea of butchering yourself on farm because you feel like it would be safer for your customers to do them, in a professional, legitimate butcher facility, I just want to encourage you that number one, your customers are competent. They are capable of looking at you, looking at your farm, looking at your products, and determining for themselves without any entity's, decision for them, whether or not they're comfortable eating your products. Okay. Because ultimately, there are many, many facilities that are licensed through the state as being safe, legit, and they haven't been inspected for over 4 years. I know at least 2 places local to me that are licensed, but have not been inspected in over 4 years. So just because they paid to have a piece of paper on their wall doesn't mean that they're truly held to a higher standard when it comes to safety in processing and handling meat. I'll also add that the safe way to process chicken by almost every professional poultry processor is to use a chlorine bath on their birds. They do not say that is safe or legal in Europe. However, that is considered safe. So I could go on a tangent here. I think you're getting the gist of, the whole process, but do your research, determine what you are comfortable with doing based on your research. And if you're going to pay for processing and not do it on farm, but even if you're going to do it on farm, we will add that into the factors of pricing. Okay. All right. Let's go into numbers types thing. This is where I get really nerdy and I get to take my official homesteady mom hat off and put my business mom hat on. And I'm going to be referencing a lot of this document, which is in your handbook. I have plans to make this like a digital form so that you can just plug it in, but you will have to do some math. You'll have to bust out your calculator in order to figure it out. So profitability details first. Let me just check this, make sure there's not a question. Christy wants to know, do we have a lot of coolers that we use to put them on ice when you're butchering? Or do you have another way to cool down? That is a good question. I will answer that actually when I talk about my customer kind of how we export and hand out all of the stuff. So I'll come back to that, Christy. Let's talk about profitability. So there are 2 major keys to being profitable selling meat chickens. The first is to lower your cost of raising them. The second is to make sure that you are pricing accordingly. Okay. So let's talk about lowering cost first. There's really 3 major reoccurring costs that you have raising meat chickens. That is the chicks themselves, the feed they're going to eat, and then the processing. Okay. Infrastructure costs like your chicken tractor or pen, your feeders, your waterers, any other items they use. Obviously, those are also going to be costs, but we're not going to include that for our pricing and profitability. Because for us personally on the homestead, those go into a different category of expenses costs. But we categorize those just separately on our homestead. So first thing to consider, please do not try to raise meat chickens for profit. If you're just going to buy birds directly from and feed directly from Tractor Supply or whatever your local big box feed store. Okay. TSC is the middleman. They are the ones that make the money. So if you occasionally can get chicks for a really big discount, like sometimes they got 50-cent birds that are a week old. I get it. That's awesome. That's much, much cheaper. But you can't guarantee that. And a lot of times you can't get a very large amount of them for that discount. It's going to be like a dozen or two at most. So if you've always been buying feed from your local Tractor Supply or similar store, the first step is to do some research and find some different options. So you can just Google the word hatcheries or feed mill along with your zip code and kind of see what comes up within like a 2-hour radius. Okay. Hatcheries actually don't technically need to be close by. The one that I primarily use is called the Freedom Ranger Hatchery because that's the breed of meat chickens we raise. And they're in Pennsylvania, which is 10 hours away. So just make sure that whatever hatchery you're ordering from is pretty reputable, because ordering directly from the hatchery is going to be significantly cheaper, especially the more birds you buy. So I paid this year $1.68 per bird, and I went to Family Farm and Home, which is kind of like our local TSC type store, and the same bird was $3.90. So it was over 2 cents cheaper getting it directly from the hatchery. Take the time to check prices from 2 to 3 different hatcheries for whatever breed you're raising, whether that is Cornish or Rangers or something different. And one more bonus tip, which I've shared a lot, is that if you have a network of local homesteady, food growing type people, this is a really great time to join together, or even if you have like a local homesteading small farms Facebook group, those are always a great source for it connecting as well. But gather people together and place a bulk order for even less pricing. So I paid $1.68 per bird this year. We do 80 birds per batch. So I actually have every single batch 200 to 250 birds ordered that I am selling the excess off. So for a 200 bird order, I have 120 to sell. And if I sell them for $2.80 each, that means that all 80 of mine are free. Okay. And like I mentioned, 280 is still much cheaper than somebody going and buying it from the farm store. In fact, most of the people that I have locked in to order chicks from me for this year, I think the most I had somebody get was 75. Most people are getting between 20 and 40 birds, which means if they order directly from the hatchery, they would be paying at least 280 for that quantity. But then they have to go to the post office at 6 a.m. versus me going for them, and then they can come to me and pick them up at their leisure. So it really is a win-win for everybody. It takes a little bit more organization, obviously, but I take money up front from people for ordering chicks. So I don't have to pay for 200 birds out of pocket and then hope I can sell them. I collect those payments from people and then I place the order. And it's just a really, I mean, you can't lower your price more than getting it to zero, right? Unless I guess you're making money. But so shop around for your birds. This was a fun number. So out of my 400 birds this year, by buying some extra ones and selling them for an upcharge, this is increasing my profitability this year over $700 on 300 birds. That's a pretty significant savings, not having to buy the chicks. So that's your chick cost. Now let's talk about saving money on your feed. I recognize I'm very blessed because I live in an area that is very heavily surrounded with a lot of Amish, and there's a lot of Amish feed mills that are very affordable, even for non-GMO feed, which is what we grow our birds on. But just like other hatcheries, it really is worth looking and seeing what your options are within a 2-hour radius. Call and figure out what their price per pound is, and if they have a discount if you're ordering in bulk. And we'll talk about calculating how much you're going to need in a minute. But if you can get feed even for 5 or 10 cents less per pound, it's probably worth borrowing a truck or a trailer and going for a drive. So We use, sorry, my dog is yelling at birds, I think. We use an 18 to 20% grower feed for our meat chickens, which last year I paid 39 cents a pound for. And this year I found a new place, and it's 29 cents a pound. So 10 cents savings, which that's going to end up saving us $1,000, just that 10 cents. So these little numbers, I mean, you might not be doing 400 birds, but still, even if you were doing 200 birds, $500 savings, or a $350 savings not buying chicks. These types of things add up. And if you want to run this as a sustainable business long term, even if it's only a couple $1,000s a year, you have to pay attention to those details, because those details make a really big difference when you amplify them. And if you do decide to scale and do more and more eventually, already having this mindset and this attention to detail in play is just going to help you be profitable that much sooner. Another tip for raising feed. So if you absolutely cannot find cheaper feed that is accessible, then just consider ways that you can stretch your feed to utilize less. So soaking the feed or even fully fermenting the feed is going to, the birds are going to use much, much less than if they are served just dry feed. We do not free choice feed our meat chickens because we do raise them on pasture. So they get fed once a day. When it runs out, it runs out. And then they have grass to forage and to get bugs and, grow through that way. And Freedom Rangers are great at growing off of grass and whatnot. So giving them an alternative way to consume calories other than just the feed is another way that you'll spend less. So maybe that means, if you do raise them on pasture, moving them twice a day instead of just once a day, soaking their feed so that way they're not scratching it out and just sending it off into dust. All right, last expense then is your processing or packaging. As I mentioned, every area has different rules on this, but the thought process is going to be the same. So if you are going to use a processing facility, shop around, see what your options are. One might be 15 minutes closer, but if they are 50 cents or $1 more per bird, calculate out your gas costs. It might actually make more sense to drive a little bit farther, even for a few dozen birds. And if you are butchering at home, think about what kind of reoccurring costs you're going to have. So instead of buying ice every time you process, can you get some old water jugs and freeze those and have them kind of be used over and over for chilling your chickens? Think through all of like the consumable things. So we use shrink wrap bags for our whole birds, and I can buy 30 or 40 at a time, but I save, I think it's like 5 cents per bag. No, it must be more than that. I think I save like 15 cents per bag if I get 1,000 of them at once, which 1,000 of them, obviously it takes us several years to go through those, but it's worth it because it ends up saving us a couple $100. All right, so that's everything for saving money. Now let's talk about calculating your costs and pricing. If you have been raising meat chickens and I know there were 2 people that were signing up for this class, and I was kind of having the conversation that they've been raising chickens for people. They think that they're making money, but they want to do it a little bit more. And I'm just going to tell you, I've never met somebody who was accidentally profiting raising meat chickens. Okay. You have to know the numbers. You actually have to look at what your costs are to know if you're profiting. And you need to know how much, your chicks and your feed and your processing cost. So that way you can determine the appropriate pricing. So I am going to share my formula with you based on my numbers, but it's important that you adjust them based on your numbers. So what you determine you will be buying for chicks and feed and your processing. But you can use my formula. I have on the handbook page different numbers than the ones I'm going to say, but just for like ease of understanding, I'm going to use a little bit smaller number. So the first thing we need to calculate is your expenses. So for simple math, let's use the number 10. Let's say you're going to raise 10 birds. If you want to think about 100, just add a 0. So let's say you're ordering 10 chicks, they're $2 each. So your total cost is $20 for chicks. Let's say you're getting feed like I am for 29 cents a pound. I always figure about 20 pounds of feed per bird. Sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's more like 22 or 23. But for us in our pasture, in our feed, in our breed of chickens, we found about 20 pounds per bird. So 10 birds are going to eat 200 pounds at 29 cents a pound. That's $58. So now I have $20 for chicks, $58 for feed. Then we have the processing costs. Just like we mentioned, meat chickens are different than layers, and you have to factor in some loss. Usually 5 to 10% is what you can have with a meat chicken batch. We've had worse batches. We've also had batches where we didn't have any loss. But let's say out of the 10 birds I bought, 9 of them get to actually being processed. We process ourselves, and it costs us about $2 for the bags and the labels and the propane for our scalder, and just, a few minimal expenses, but about $2 per bird. Okay. So for 9 birds, $2 each, that's $18. So now I have $20 for my chicks, $58 for feed, $18 for processing, $96 total to raise these birds. If you divide that by the 9 that I actually have available to sell, that's $10.67 per bird. Okay. So now you know the absolute minimum amount that you need to charge to determine your pricing. $10.67. Let's just say $11. I think that's pretty typical from people I've talked to throughout the United States and Canada for pricing is between $9 and $11 per bird. All right, so now we know our costs. We need to do a little more math to figure out our pricing, because you're not just going to sell it for $10.67 if you're trying to cover the cost of a bird for yourself, right? 3 things to consider for pricing. Your cost, of course. You also need to consider your market, and you also need to consider your labor. We know your costs, but you need to do some research for the market in the general area, which, by the way, this can be your entire state. It doesn't have to be your specific town. It doesn't even have to be your specific county. Probably 50% of my chicken customers live 45 minutes to an hour away in actually the closest city. So based on your method of raising birds, what are other people selling meat chickens for consistently? And based on your method, I mean, are you a non-GMO feed? Are you organic feed? Are you conventionally fed? Are you raising your chickens on pasture, or are you raising them in a pen? Are you raising a heritage breed, or are you raising Cornish cross? Find people that are most similar in what their product is to you to compare pricing to. Do not compare your pricing to the grocery store, period, ever. And do not compare your pricing to your neighbor that is selling them for $2 a pound and hoping that it covers her costs. Okay. You're not $2 a pound chicken. You're not $2 a dozen eggs. All right. You are actually a sustainable, profitable homestead business. And you need to look at other people that have been sustainable and profitable and doing it long term and determine what they are pricing. So we are non-GMO fed, pasture grazed, heritage breeds in Michigan, which there can be anywhere between $4.50 a pound up to $7.50 a pound is what other farms that do this year after year after year are charging. And just to give you an idea, $4.50 to $7.50 is what my specific market is. So we had been at $4.75 a pound for many, many years, at least 3 years. And I just bumped it up this year to $5.25 a pound. So at $5.25 a pound, let's say that our bird weighs 4.5 pounds. That means that for that bird, we are charging $23.63. Now, if we subtract what it cost us to raise it, which was $10.67, that means that we are profiting $12.96 a bird. Now, if your goal is to just cover the cost of your own birds, by those numbers, for every bird you raise, you will get one for free, right? Because you're profiting $12.96 and it only costs you $10.67. Now, just to be clear, that's a 4.5 pound bird. We almost always average more around 5.5 pounds, though, which at 5.5 pounds would be $18.21 profit per bird. And if you factor in that we don't actually pay for our chicks, we don't actually have that $2 cost per bird, $20.21. That's what I estimate our profit per bird will be this year. $20.21 per bird. And we do 300 of them, you guys. 300 isn't that many. You can do the math on that. Now, part of that profit does pay for the cost of the ones that we keep for ourselves, because we keep 100 for our own family. And obviously, this is not like a full-time quit your job income stream, but I think it's usually like 4 to 5 grand, 4 to 5 grand profit each year that we have. And that is our hay money. That is money that we use to buy hay for our cows. And usually that is what we use to upgrade other infrastructure, or ironically, our processing tools for our meat chickens. So, all right, let's still talk about labor. So how do you calculate labor, and do you really have to? Yes and no. I do think it's important to calculate labor if you plan to scale your meat chicken operation, because you're going to have to eventually factor in for for some compensation. So for us personally, for tax services, we do not take any payment from our homestead for the work that we put in. Instead, we have a payout of chickens for our family. And so I have to have rough numbers for that purposes. That's something that I go into more in my financially independent homestead program, but just keep that in mind if that's your goal eventually, that it's helpful to know. So figuring labor is going to vary different for everybody, but we figure about an hour a day for meat chicken chores for their lifetime. So if you're raising Cornish cross, that's about 8 weeks, 56 hours. For Freedom Rangers, it's more like 10 to 12 weeks or up to 86 hours. We also have about 6 hours into the processing, the packaging, the marketing, general admin work for each batch. Now, the caveat is that there is some overlap, of course. So we only do an hour of labor, even though we might have like 3 batches of chickens going at once. We still do an hour of labor, even versus 1 batch. So it's not a perfect system, but this is just the beginning of giving you some idea of how to calculate stuff. So for easy math again, let's just say that we put 100 hours of labor into an 80 bird batch. Now I am going to plan on having that full 80 birds processed, because the wonderful benefit of ordering directly from the hatchery is that you get some bonus birds typically. So when they're shipping them, if you order 80, they will send you probably like 83, just in case something happens in transit and you lose one of them, you still get the full amount. Now, the batch that I got last week that I ordered 200, I had 120 that went to other homes. And when I counted, I actually had 88 birds. So I had 8 extra birds. So even if we do have some loss, I still probably will process 80 from this batch. So one that actually leads to one thing that's an important consideration. So there's always risk in business. There's always risk in livestock. So you do need to give yourself a buffer for loss. We're going to talk about how we kind of take deposits for chickens from our customers, but I always leave about 15 to 20% of my birds what I call unclaimed, or there's no deposit on them. And that's on top of the 100 that we have for our own family. So that way, if we do have a massive loss for, predation or a disease, I am still able to fulfill the orders that I have, been given deposits for. And we actually did have this happen in, I think it was 2021. We had massive loss. I think we had 180 birds that year, and we lost like 60 or 70 of them. It was significant. Um, and, had I not had a buffer of birds that I hadn't promised people, I would have been severely stressed and strapped financially to scrounge up deposits to give back to people, which, it's obviously necessary, but then it's kind of frustrating for the customer because then they have to find somewhere else to buy the birds that they were planning on having for their family. So give yourself a buffer for how many you are willing to offer deposits for. Okay, one final wrap up of number things. So this is the final finish out number. If we have 100 hours into 80 birds, that is 1.25 hours per bird. If my 4.5 pound bird is, weighing out or it's adding up to be $23.63 or a $12.96 hourly rate. These are low ball numbers. I always plan on low, but realistically, if we had a 5.5 pound bird that we sold for $28.88 and it cost me $8.67 because I'm not buying a chick, that means I'm raising chickens for $20.21 an hour. So that is more of a fair and legitimate wage for somebody. But yeah, you're not making bank, but still, if you're already out there doing them for your own family, then, oh, sound still on? Can you guys hear me? Brenda can. All right. Good. All right, let's dive into finding and managing customers. I know that this is a fire hose, but we are getting to the last big section, and then the bonus section will go quick. So we'll be cutting it close for my hour of teaching, but that was because we had that unexpected bathroom break in there. So, all right, finding and managing customers. A lot of people might suggest when you start selling chickens to just talk to the people talk to your family, talk to your friends and neighbors. And I just have to say that in 8 years of raising meat chickens, I've never once had anybody in my family buy a single bird. Nobody from my family, nobody from my husband's family. And yeah, that's just, they haven't. They've never ever bought one. So we have great family, but they are just not what you call your target market. You're not selling magazines or candy bars to, raise money for a kid's school situation. Okay. This is a specific product for a specific person. Okay. And most likely that specific person isn't your neighbor. Before you start marketing or advertising your product, you really need to think about who would be the person that would buy this. Most likely it's somebody that's going to be passionate about local food, maybe even somebody that has really high standards for health and what goes into their bodies. They want things to be, very toxin and chemical free. So once you determine who the person is that's going to buy your product, then you need to think about where can you find this person? Are they your chiropractor? Are they in your homeschool co-op? Are they a part of your nature group? Perhaps there is a local CSA farm that doesn't raise meat chickens and they have customers that really want local quality food, but they need a resource for proteins, for animal proteins, for eggs, and for chicken. And you can talk to that farmer and you can collaborate on, leveraging their customer base for your products. Certainly, you can put chicken on your personal Facebook page, and you'll probably get some takers. Charlotte Smith is a big farm marketing kind of guru, and she always calls those the lowest hanging fruit sales. So a lot of times the first year you offer selling something, you'll get a lot of people that buy it just because they want to support you, okay? But they probably aren't going to be the reoccurring customers because they're not actually your target market. Just think about the people that care about what you're offering, okay? You're not going to sell secondhand clothes that your kids grew out of to a grandma, right? Like she doesn't have any need for them. She doesn't have any desire for them. Some people don't care about high quality food. That is fine. It's sad, but it's true. And you don't have to be offended if people that you ask to buy your chicken say no, because it's better use of your energy to focus on the people that are actually interested in your product. And the best part is that once you kind of establish this group of customers, they will do the marketing for you. Okay. Local chicken specifically, local food in general, I found is such a wonderful market for word of mouth advertising, because it's not something that people can, you can't just walk into Walmart and get it. It's hard to find the person that you connect with that's doing what you want and producing the item that you need. So when you actually find that person, everybody's like, who are they? And they like jump and they force people to share. And I would say, so the first year that we raised chickens, we raised that 100. We had 50 to sell, and three of the four customers that we had that bought those 50 chickens, three of them were in a natural childbirth community that I was in at the time, actually. And to this day, two of those three people are still our customers 8 years or 7 years later. Okay. The one person that isn't a customer anymore raises her own meat chickens now. But those two original customers that I had have brought me at least 5 or 6 new people that have bought products from us. So once you get a few really good customers, it's going to be much easier to add more on just from them and who they know. So don't be afraid to offer 1 or 2 free chickens to people that are kind of in your target group. So take it to that farmer that has the CSA or the herd share. Take them to your chiropractor or to a local, yoga studio or a acupuncturist or anybody that is just in that natural health minded group, if that's what you decide that your target market is. Don't spend a lot of time advertising at the feed store. And also, this is important, do not predetermine someone's willingness to buy from far away. I've driven 3 hours to buy beef from a friend that I knew and that I trusted, that had what I wanted. I mentioned almost the majority of our customers, they live 45 minutes to an hour away. And the great thing about raising meat chickens is that they're only butchered a few times a year. Okay. When you start, you're probably only going to be offering them once or twice a year. So driving 45 minutes or an hour or even an hour and a half one time a year isn't that big of a deal for people. All right. I included in the handbook some examples of marketing flyers that you can make. And I know flyers are like typically visualized as like a printed, thing that you slap on the wall at the feed store. But there is a website called Canva, and there's a paid version, but there's a completely free version that's totally legitimate and you don't have to pay for it at all. But you can make really incredible looking flyers that are digital that you can use on Facebook. You can use them in emails. You can use them in, a lot of times I will make like one that would show up perfectly in a text message. If they opened it, it fits on a phone screen. You can make them on Canva and include all of the details about what you are offering. So that way it looks a little bit more professional and it's easier than typing it out. So let's talk about securing customers, setting expectations, and what to kind of include in those marketing flyers. So once you start to kind of, you're tapping into this target area, you start to get people that are interested. It's important to set a clear guideline or set of expectations, both for you, but also for them. So I mentioned I require a $10 deposit per bird, and I actually have a 5-bird minimum. You don't have to have a minimum. And for years I didn't, but I kept having people buy like 1 or 3 birds. And honestly, it was kind of annoying to like separating orders and having one person's bird. So I made a 5-bird minimum. You don't have to do that. But one thing you absolutely should do is you should require a deposit, because not only does the deposit help you to cover all of your upfront costs of paying for your chicks and paying for your feed, But it also locks people in so that they're not flaky, because people are flaky and they'll say, yeah, I definitely want 10 of them. And then you'll send them the bill when it's time to pick up 10 of them. And they're like, ooh, I actually can't do that right now. So it locks them in. And also, this was something I didn't expect and I didn't really perceive until a customer actually told me. Getting a deposit from people helps them financially spread out the costs. So $10, that's about a third or almost half of their overall cost, right? And I have a customer specifically. She usually gets about $500 worth of chicken from us this year. She gets 20 birds. So sending in $200, in the early spring and then paying the other $300 at pickup time is much easier on her budget than owing me $500 in the same week. So it's nice for customers as far as them being able to fit it in their budget. It's nice for you because $10 deposit per bird pays for all of your feed and chicks up front. You don't have to pay out of pocket. But it also gives you security of that bird being sold, and you not having to pay to store it until you can find a customer. So some people are hesitant to ask for money up front. But if you state it matter of factly, people would just accept it as normal. And it is. There's many people that raise chicken directly from their farm that do this method. Now, the second part of the expectations comes with the weight of the birds. So I always give a range of what's average because I can't control the final weights. Um, I usually say 4 to 6 pounds is the average. So people can do the math and get a rough idea of what the final price is going to be. But I don't want to say we'll give you a 5 pound bird. And then, out of the 10 birds, they have one that's 3.9, one that's 6.4. And they're like, what happened to 5 pounds? If it doesn't end up perfectly, 4 to 6 pound range is much easier for me to guarantee. The third expectation that you need to have set with your customers is when it comes to processing time and pickup. And this is the one that I had to learn the hardest through experience. Okay. When a customer reserves a bird, I typically am several months away from butchering, and I let them know what month the birds are going to be processed in. Even if I know my chicks are scheduled to come this week, which means that they will be processed this week, I don't tell them that exact week because there's variables. They might be ready early, they might be ready late. I just give them a month as their range of when it's going to be processed and ready for pickup. The second point of contact with your customer is 7 to 10 days before butchering. So I send out an email, and I did examples of all of these points of contact are in your handbook. So you can copy and paste them. You can use them as a reference guide. You can not use them at all if you don't want to. But my purpose in doing all of these kind of formal points of contact is that it eliminated a lot of like back and forth. I kept having customers like constantly having questions, needing me to clarify things. And this just was like, yeah, refer to the email. It's all in the email and they can just look back there. So they reserve their bird, they get their confirmation in the month that it's going to be processed. 7 to 10 days before processing, they get notice of the butchering day. We used to allow pickup on the day of butchering, but now because the quantity of we do, it was too rushed and it was too much pressure to have not only the birds ready, but like we wanted to have the farm, cleaned up. We didn't want to have them come pick up their birds and see feathers and guts all over the place. Like, they don't raise their own birds for a reason. They don't want to see that. So now we have pickup the next day, and that does require us to have coolers or freezers, which we use some of each. But it's much less pressure for us. If you're only going to be doing 20 or 30 birds, you can start first thing in the morning and have things cleaned up and picked up by the time the afternoon comes. By all means, make your pickup be same day. It'll save you the expense and it'll save the hassle of holding them overnight. So for us, it's pickup the next day, and it's only the next day. It's not 2 days later. It's not 5 days later. It's the next day, because once that bird is butchered, it requires refrigeration. And every day that you keep that bird, you are paying for a storage cost, either in actual refrigeration, in ice, and definitely in your time and like maintenance of making sure that it's chilled. So again, just be matter of fact with your customers that, this is what it is. 99% of the time, they will accept it. Now, obviously, don't make your pickup be a weird day like it's Tuesday from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Like I almost always try to make it on a Saturday. I make sure it's not a holiday weekend. And our window is usually like 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., which is more than generous. That is like almost too much time. But that's what we have offered to our customers at this point. Our reminder email 7 to 10 days before has a friendly reminder that if birds are not picked up on their designated day, it's a $10 a day storage fee. I've never had to charge somebody for this. And only one time did I make an exception for somebody. But it was a longtime customer. She buys a lot of birds from us every year, and she had literally had a baby like 2 days before the butchering date. So I held her birds while they kind of got settled and recovered. I didn't charge her for a storage fee or anything. But otherwise, it's just, you need to understand it's okay to have rules for your business. Okay. People don't call the grocery store and say, hey, can you stay open an extra 2 hours so I can come in and shop, when I have time tonight? Or, they don't tell the grocery store you got to change your processing fees or you need to change your prices. Like, businesses have rules and people accept them. When you're selling meat chickens from your farm, it's a business venture. You can have standard procedures and expectations for people. Don't let customers take advantage of you, especially, people that just because you're a small farm or homestead. There are plenty of people that eat chicken. If a customer is being really needy, you can find somebody else that is not as needy to fill their spot. Okay. That was all about kind of acquiring and managing the customers and expectations. Let's cover real quick invoicing and payments and record keeping. So for years, the only way that I accepted deposits or payments was my personal PayPal account, check, or cash. I didn't have anything fancy. Now I also have Venmo. I have a website, but when you are first starting, keep it really simple. There's fees that are associated with having a website and doing certain things on Venmo. So just keep it really simple. Again, if you are a matter of fact of like, these are your three options, then people don't question it. I talked about points of contact already, actually. I just want to make sure that I covered everything. So when they place their order right before butchering, I didn't talk about this. So an email 7 to 10 days before butchering. I also do a reminder email the day before butchering. And then I also do a reminder email the night of butchering, and this includes their final total balance, okay? And just a friendly reminder that pickup is expected. I will see you tomorrow. And again, there's examples of all these emails in the handbook. So for invoices, I just use, originally I got them from the dollar store. They are like the carbon copied receipt type booklets. Okay. So you have to put a little paper in between, but when you write on it, it makes two copies. So that way they get a copy to take and then I get a copy to keep. And this is basically our processing procedure for butchering day. So we do the actual processing. We do the cleanup and the bagging, excuse me. Once every bird is bagged, shrink wrapped, bagged whole, it gets a label on it and it gets a weight written on it. And then it goes to cool either in the freezer or the cooler. And it's important that you put the labels on before you cool them. Otherwise, it's very challenging to get them to stick. But after they are completely packaged in the way that they are going to look, I let them cool. And then I will start to, usually later that day, break up my customers' pickup orders before they come. So if I have one customer that has 5 birds they're going to pick up, I get a receipt pad, I write her name, I write that she has 5 birds. I write that the weight of all 5 birds that I pick out for her. And typically, when I am working with a customer, I know, okay, is this a single woman that lives by herself? Is this a lady that's got 10 kids? And I will try to accommodate, like, the single woman doesn't want the 7-pound bird. Okay. She wants the dinky ones that I'm happy to give her, the 3.5 pounders, the 4 pounders. I'm gonna try to give the other people the bigger birds, but still keeping them within that 4 to 6 pound range. Okay. But I will pick out 5 birds. I will write the weights of them on the receipt. And then I will put those 5 birds, depending on my system, I will either put them in a tote that has her name on it, or I will put them in a doubled up plastic grocery bag, which my very professional way of keeping that kind of intact is that I will put like masking tape around both of the handles so it's enclosed, and then I write the customer's name on it. And if they have multiple bags, because you can only fit about 4 chickens in each bag, I'll write Katie, 1 of 2. And then I know in my freezer somewhere there's 2 bags for Katie. I try to put them in the same spot. But that way, if for some reason when a customer comes and picks up, I'm in the bathroom or I'm milking the cow, my husband or my older kids can say, your name's Katie. Cool. This is your receipt. This is your bag. Oh, you have a second bag. And they can figure it out. And again, when you are small, this doesn't seem like a big deal. But as you scale to even a few hundred birds, having a system, or what people in business world call a standard operating procedure, in place just makes it a lot more efficient and enjoyable, versus making you feel really frazzled. Okay. So receipt with all of the birds, poundage written on it, and then I can calculate out the math. Obviously, I'm going to take off, if she did 5 birds, she gave me a $50 deposit. I will deduct that to whatever her price is and just have the total balance on the end of the invoice. What else did I forget here? I think that's pretty much it for the actual pickup portion of it. Let me look at the handbook quick and see. But I kind of was adding to that after the fact. Okay. So yeah, I have the standard operating procedures, everything kind of outlined in here too. Okay, let's do bonus ideas. Thank you guys for hanging with me, but hopefully this is thorough. I mentioned how we have really maxed out the amount of birds that our property can raise on this property. So besides keeping our expenses in check, one way that I'm really focusing on increasing profitability is through value added products and alternative income ideas. So value adding is just like it sounds. It's taking something that's worth a certain amount and making it worth more. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this for meat chickens. So if you are selling a whole bird for $5 a pound, a 5-pound bird is worth $25. But if you are going to cut that same bird or sell that same bird cut up into parts and sell those parts individually, chicken breast that is local and pasture raised, that can go for $15 a pound alone. And you can sell drums and wings for $6 or $8 a pound. You can sell the carcass. So you could turn a 25-pound bird into a 38-pound bird, or sorry, $25 bird into a $38 bird, just by adding the value of it being in parts, because some people don't like to eat a whole bird. They want to have just chicken breast or just drums. Another thing to consider is things that are commonly associated as waste products. So chicken necks, chicken feet, the carcasses, the organs. People go crazy for livers and gizzards, and all of those things can be packaged up and offered for sale. Again, you have to check what your legal considerations are and what your comfort is. Some people just slap on there, not for human consumption, and say that covers things well enough. But that's totally up for you. Another value added idea is to offer your whole chicken as kind of like a meal in a box type thing. So you can add veggies or herbs and even a recipe, so people can come and they can pick up the whole collection and go home and make dinner with it. And it's kind of a fun experience with them. Now, for alternative income ideas, one of the most profitable ways that we have used meat chickens, though, by far, is through doing on farm workshops. So we have two different workshops that we do actually on our farm. One is a whole how to raise and process meat chickens class. It's 4 hours, and we charge $80 a person for it. They take one bird home and they do eat lunch. So for the $80 ticket, I typically have about $20 of cost into hosting them. So 10, $11 for the bird they take home, plus lunch and some printable, things that they take with them as well. So I'm making, instead of $25 off of a bird, we are making nearly $60 on a bird, the same bird. We also offer a class that is just a hands-on butchering class. So a lot of times we get people that have been raising chickens for many years, but taking them to be processed, and they're ready to learn how to process themselves. So they don't need the whole how to raise them. They just want the actual, hands-on butchering aspect of it. So we also charge for that. I believe that one's $40, and they can come butcher with us for 2 hours and take one home. Another option is online classes. So again, I've mentioned I have a whole online video course that's everything from choosing your breed of meat chickens, raising them, building a chicken tractor, butchering them. I also have a course on how to cook a whole bird, how to break down a whole bird, how to make broth with your bird. And the great thing about online type products is that you make them one time and then there's no limit to how many you can sell. So you could literally take one bird that you recorded a tutorial on how to butcher it, and you could sell that for $20, and then you could make thousands on it in theory if you are just constantly marketing it and offering it to people. So that's another way to take what you do on your homestead, not even just specifically meat chickens, but that's another way that we've been able to generate a lot of income, is just by sharing it in a context that is, a continual option to sell. Other digital ideas for income: you could make a PDF plan for how to build your chicken tractor. You could host a farm to table event and use your birds as a part of the meal. Yeah, there's tons. There's so many ideas out there for other income producing ideas. If you're willing to be creative, you do not have to be limited by the quantity of birds that you are growing. So that's it, you guys. That's all that I had. So let's go back and do some Q&A now. And I do just want to do a quick plug. So if you have not already joined my Jumpstart Your Financially Independent Homestead program, which it starts next week, and we are going to spend, the whole month of April. We'll have one call each Friday to do kind of some Q&A and some coaching. But basically, the whole purpose of the program is designed to be a way to guide and coach you through monetizing your homestead, so that way it can have some income to cover the costs that you have, you're not able to get rid of, like your feed and your, fencing and things like that. But it's also a lot of mindset and just habit training for keeping your homestead running in a way that is resourceful and frugal, and not buying into kind of this social media, perception of homesteading where everything's got to be top of the line and aesthetically pleasing. But I think one of the unexpected benefits about this program that I didn't realize is that there is a community Facebook page that my hope would be a place where people could just find accountability. But there's so much like inspiration and like camaraderie, and like being surrounded by people that are weird and like want to homestead in a way that is, economically like benefiting their family and not just for, looks or whatnot. It's really, really awesome. So I will send an email with details that if you want to join with a discount code. But let us get to your questions. I'm going to scroll all the way back to the top. And if you haven't put some in the chat and you have some, let me know. I have a few others. Okay, so Christy, do you have a lot of coolers? I kind of answered that. So I prefer to use a variety of things when chilling a lot of chickens, because if you have an empty freezer and you put 50 birds in it, it's not going to cool those birds down. Okay. The heat of the birds, even though they are pre-chilled, they are in a ice bath for about an hour before they get packaged and put in the freezer. They're still going to have some warmth to them. And it's not ideal to put them all in one freezer. So we will typically have them spread out between multiple freezers and multiple coolers, just so that they can truly be chilling as quickly as possible. All right. What questions would you ask a feed mill about their food? I know meat birds eat differently than layer chicks, and do you feel like you can make a homemade feed for them? We currently purchase a meat bird feed, but are looking for cheaper feed options. So I think that it really depends on what your price is going to be for that individual component of your feed. A long time ago, it's been a long time, I priced out making our own chicken feed by buying the individual grains and putting them together myself. And it wasn't going to save me money to do it that route. Now, at this point, it's really just a matter of scale. I don't want to be mixing feed. We go through 10,000 pounds of meat chicken feed a year, and manually pouring those into buckets, and, carrying them out to the tractors is enough work. I don't want to have to measure and mix stuff. So, questions that you would ask about their food. That's a good question. I definitely, if your goal is to have something non-GMO or organic, and they are not the grower, then I would definitely ask specifications about who their producer is. It's really good to know when they mix. So, like when we went and picked up our first order of feed 2 weeks ago, they literally had mixed it that morning and put it in bags. So it hadn't been sitting on a pallet outside for like several days. It was mixed that morning because, especially if your feed is going to be partially ground, when it starts to get ground, it's losing that nutritional value. And it's not like, it's going to lose it in a week. We get our meat chicken order, and then it takes us 2 months before we get through all of that feed. So it's not like an urgency thing as far as using it right away, but I don't want it to have already been sitting there 2 months by the time I get it, if that makes sense. For weight when selling, is that before gutting or after? The selling weight per pound for us is after that bird is completely dressed. So there's no guts, there's no head, there's no feet, there's no feathers. You could stick that bird directly in the oven. That is the price per pound. And we leave the necks on, actually. Some people leave the necks off. Personally, I prefer the look of a packaged chicken with a neck off. I think it looks nicer, but the neck is weight, and also the neck is valuable. Like, I could keep all of the necks and feed them to my dogs, but that would be hundreds of chicken necks, and they don't need that many. So I give them with the customer. It's more pounds for the bird, and it's also something they can use then if they want to make stock from the carcass afterwards. Pam did a minimum this year too. Do they always pay before pickup? How do you verify that they have? If so, so they do the deposit, and when they come to pick up, we are here. So they are not self-serve pickup. We just don't have the facilities for that. I can only think of maybe one time where somebody came and we weren't here for whatever reason, and they had to pick up but it was somebody that I knew and I was comfortable doing that. But otherwise, it's just setting that expectation. 7 to 10 days before butchering, you're saying, hey, processing's this day. You can pick up the next day. By the way, when you pick up, we take these forms of payment. We'll let you know the total the night of. And then the night before, hey, this is your total. These are your payment options. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. And so when people come to pick up, it's a very natural exchange of like, hey, these are your birds. Cool. Here's your receipt. I've never even had to prompt somebody of like, how do you want to pay? People are usually prepared and they're ready for it. I definitely need a chicken tractor plan. My husband built one that was too big. Yeah, I really like our chicken tractors, especially for the scale that we're currently on. They're 8x10, so we put 40 birds in each one, and they're very economical to build. what I have found now is that we are kind of growing to the point where I feel like it would be nicer to have something bigger. Like if I had something that I could put 100 birds into and I'd only have one thing to move and I could set up a watering system that was that entire structure, I'd be game for that. And we have some ideas, but it's just that logistics of, do we make something with our time that we don't currently have? Or do we change something that we have that's working, but we don't necessarily like it? So I'm not sure if we will update that or not this year. Let me pull up the few questions that I had written in my notes on my phone. All right, so one question was about feed. So trying to decide if I'm going to do non-GMO or organic. So I think that and then how to, if you buy in a larger quantity, how can you best store it to keep it dry and away from rodents? So non-GMO versus organic, or even versus conventional feed. Our first 2 or even 3 years raising meat chickens, we were raising them on 100% organic feed that we got from across the state. It was like a 3-hour drive to go there and back. But we were only doing it once a year at that point. And that was really important to us to do 100% organic. But what we realized as we scaled is that, number one, we didn't necessarily have the market to sell more birds organically. At least not enough, and not at the price we would need to, because it was a significant price difference in the feed. So we shifted to being non-GMO, and that opened up a lot of people that like wanted to buy local food, but like weren't going to pay $40 for one chicken. That just wasn't in their budget. And we've settled on that, as that we're comfortable with that. And you just have to decide what you're comfortable with. Storing feed. So we have an enclosed trailer that we use to store our meat chicken feed. Sometimes it's what we go and we pick it up on, and sometimes it's not, but it's parked out kind of by the field. So proximity wise, it's a lot more convenient than keeping in the barn. Is it rodent proof? Definitely not. I'm sure that there are rodents that can and do get into there, but I think it's more important that it is waterproof, because you don't want your feed to get wet and to be molding. And I mean, when you're doing a large capacity, even if we had considered getting like one of those big upright, like grain auger type storage situations. But even in those, a lot of times people have issues with condensation, and you end up losing feed that gets moldy because it gets wet from that condensation. And so, yeah, we just use an enclosed trailer, and I don't think any mice that do get into there are making too big of a dent that it's been an issue. But we also have lots of barn cats that are running around and probably aware that that's a hot spot for mice to hang out. So hopefully, usually they are really good about keeping it in check. All right, any other questions in the chat? Otherwise, I'll look at my other ones here. I know this one. Okay, so this question was specifically about butchering them at home, tips for doing it safely and cleanly. And then I also had a question, I'll go back to this one first though, about sourcing feed and affordably. So in Michigan, because I know that this is Michigan-based girl, we get feed from a Amish mill. The thing with Amish is that there's no names and there's no phone numbers. Okay. You just have to go there. They are in Stanwood, Michigan, which is probably about 40 minutes north of Grand Rapids, on the east side of 131, just past Howard City. And they are on 5 Mile Road. And if I haven't sent you let me see if I've got the address exactly. The address for this one specifically, and this is the thing, if you have Amish in your area, or if you have local feed places like this that you are like not sure because you can't get in contact with them because they don't have a phone number, just go there. Like, just go there. We interact with the Amish a lot, and it's not abnormal to just show up at their house because that's where they do business. Okay, I lied. It's 7 Mile. 13324 7 Mile Road, Stanwood, Michigan. That is the Amish place that we get feed from. Pretty sure his name is Paul. I actually have not been there. Tommy has been doing the trips there. And then what was the other question that I had here? Okay, so for butchering at home, tips for just making sure that you're doing things cleanly. When we first started butchering, we have upgraded our butchering system substantially the past few years. But when we first started butchering, we were using a folding plastic table, that was kind of up on concrete or cinder blocks. So that way it was, we weren't killing our back arching over. And then we were buying plastic throwaway like tablecloths, okay? Because even though it was a plastic kind of cleanable surface, it was kind of dingy. So we would tape that onto our table. We will sterilize everything with vinegar. And about once a year, we'll give things a good scrub down with like bleach and something a little bit stronger. But otherwise, like everything we do is open air. It's outside, making sure that you are obviously using clean tools, making sure that you are rinsing birds thoroughly. And then if you follow me on Instagram or you've been through my Raising Meat Chickens course, we created this drying rack out of PVC that we use once our birds are whole, they're finished processing. I can put them upside down on this drying rack so that they can drip dry, and I can pick off any of the little pin feathers with some sterilized tweezers, and it makes it so that there's not as much moisture on them when I put them on the bags or put the bags on them. And then ultimately there's not as much freezer burn because there's not that extra moisture in the bag. But it's super simple. It allows me to do a lot of that kind of final cleanup of the bird. But like our big kids are the ones that do all the evisceration. So my husband does the killing, and a lot of times he does the plucking and scalding. And then our big kids are doing the evisceration table. And then I do the final quality control, packaging, labeling, weighing, and invoicing. And it's something that takes practice. And the more you do it, the more confident you're in it. And the fact that we have been eating birds processed this way for years without any ill effects obviously says something. We definitely live in a society that is a little bit sterilized heavy. And it's not ultimately necessary. Now, the biggest worry I think would be is if you're working with hot birds in direct sunlight and you're slow. So if you are new to processing and you're very, very slow and it takes you an hour to get one bird from being culled to being in the cooler, that type of situation, you may want to adjust and have it. I know some people that they will cool the bird for a period of time before they eviscerate. But obviously that makes it harder because it starts to stiffen up. All right, I think the other questions that I have on my phone, I actually covered. Are there any other questions for those of you that are here live? Any other comments or things before I end this? Thank you again for your flexibility of my lack of preparedness in my free Zoom trial, but I hope that this was informative. I hope it was good information that you can utilize and apply on your homesteads. And if there's anything that after the fact you come back to thinking that I didn't cover, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share.
Hey, Beth, I have a question.
Go for it.
So, and I'm so sorry, I came on very late in the game on this one. So I'm Jamie. Where do you get your chicks from, your birds do you have multiple sources? And if you've answered this and those that are on, oh my gosh, you already said it, I'm so sorry. But do you have multiple places that you order your chicks from, or do you mainly use just one specific distributor?
Good question. I did cover that. I ordered directly from the hatchery. So you'll get the replay and you can watch this, but I'm happy to recap it. So I ordered directly from the hatchery, and we actually, I didn't mention this, but we raise Freedom Rangers. But for many years, we were raising some Freedom Rangers and some Cornish because we had customers that definitely preferred the Freedom Rangers. We prefer the Freedom Rangers, but we liked the quickness and the efficiency of the Cornish. So I had two separate hatcheries. I was ordering Cornish from a local one called Town Line. It's in Michigan. There's nothing special about them. They were just proximity close. Freedom Rangers, I order from the Freedom Ranger hatchery. And the only reason I order them from the Freedom Ranger hatchery was because they were the cheapest price that I found when I was researching. So when you check out the replay though, yeah, I covered, kind of tips for figuring out where to find the cheapest ones, make sure they're reputable, because it ultimately that will end up affecting your profit if you can, tweak that one little thing about where you're getting them. Catherine asks, when's the next class? Okay, clarify, Catherine. When's the next online class? When's my next in-person class? What kind of class? I do have things coming up. Online. So my next online class, I have an online class that I'm doing and I have not announced it yet. Because I'm going to be doing my financially independent homestead program all for the month of April. But I do have an online canning class that I'm planning to do in June, as long as I don't come up with another idea or have something else requested to me. That's been something that's really been highly requested, and I usually try to, you know, I want to offer what's going to be beneficial to people. So if you have other ideas for classes you think I would be qualified to teach, I'm happy for input. All right. I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks again. Hopefully this was helpful. I will talk to you all again soon.